Do you think being a flight attendant is just an easy job? Alex Gray, the millionaire's son, decided to conceal his identity and apply for the role. But from his very first flight, he uncovered a dark secret about Gray Air, the company where his father is CEO. What's really going on? Does Alex have the courage to confront this injustice? The soft sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, casting a warm glow on the polished oak conference table. Behind it, a massive world map adorned the wall, with the gleaming Gray Air logo in the corner, a symbol of the company's global ambition. William Gray, clad in a perfectly tailored dark suit, stood by the map, holding a report in one hand. His gaze was sharp, calm, yet undeniably authoritative. Across from him sat Alex Gray, his son, reclining in a swivel chair. Dressed in a crisp suit, his bright face reflected admiration for his father, though shadowed with a hint of uncertainty.
"Alex,"
William began, his voice steady but firm.
"theory alone won't help you understand the world. If you want to inherit Gray Air, you need to start from the most grounded."
Alex tilted his head, his brow furrowing as a faint smile touched his lips.
"An internship as a flight attendant. You think serving coffee will teach me how things run?"
William stepped closer to the table, his gaze unyielding, each word deliberate.
"It's not about coffee. It's about how you deal with people where no one cares who you are."
Alex picked up the coffee mug on the table, turning it slowly in his hand, his expression contemplative. After a few moments, he let out a soft chuckle, his eyes alight with a spark of challenge.
"Very fine, Dad. I'll do it. But no one will know I'm the CEO's son."
William allowed a faint smile to surface, nodding his approval.
"Exactly. You'll go in as an ordinary employee. If you succeed, you'll understand Gray Air isn't just about numbers and strategies. You'll see it through the eyes of the people who keep it soaring every day."
Alex sat quietly for a moment, holding his father's gaze, then gave a slight nod, his expression firm with determination. Outside the window, a Gray Air plane roared into the sky, gliding across the deep blue expanse. The Gray Air emblem gleamed under the sun, a beacon of ambition. The story begins. The training room was bright, with rows of neatly arranged chairs and a whiteboard at the front covered in a packed schedule. The fluorescent lights cast a serious, almost oppressive atmosphere as all the trainees focused intently on the lecture about workplace challenges. Maya Johnson, a flight attendant trainee, sat upright in the middle row. At 26, she was used to working twice as hard to prove her worth in an environment that often felt unfair. As a black woman, she frequently endured unspoken scrutiny from judgmental gazes, but she maintained her resilience. Her hand trembled slightly when the instructor mentioned challenges for cabin crew. The pen in her hand wavered against her notebook. Behind Maya, Ryan Taylor, the son of Gray Air's CEO. Richard Taylor lounged in his seat with a smug attitude. At 23, he was well acquainted with privilege and relied heavily on his father's influence to bend things in his favor. Ryan had one leg propped on the chair in front of him, a blatant display of defiance in the training room that he made no effort to hide. Ryan wasn't paying attention to the lecture. His eyes were glued to his phone, occasionally glancing up just to sneer at the other trainees. When his gaze landed on Maya diligently taking notes, he smirked. His cold eyes and condescending grin seemed to say, "Why bother? You'll never rise above people like me." Maya shrank slightly in her seat, her eyes avoiding his. She gripped her pen tighter, trying to mask the rising sense of oppression that clawed at her chest. The door to the room swung open. Alex Gray entered, exuding confidence without overstepping into arrogance. His eyes scanned the room briefly before landing on Maya, who sat with an uneasy but composed expression. He walked over and took the seat next to her, his movements calm, as if to silently assert his presence as a quiet support. Maya glanced at him, her eyes flickering with a hint of surprise, but she said nothing. Ryan noticed Alex immediately. He lowered his leg from the chair and turned to face him with a cocky grin.
"You new here?"
he asked, his tone loud and derisive, intended for everyone to hear.
"Let me clue you in. Gray hair is for the powerful, not for people playing dress up."
Alex didn't take the bait. He looked at Ryan evenly, his posture straight as he replied with a calm yet cutting tone.
"What's your take on earning power through actual ability?"
The words landed like a slap. Ryan's smirk faltered for a fraction of a second, and his eyes flashed with irritation. But he said nothing, instead turning away with an air of wounded pride. Maya stole another glance at Alex, her gaze now holding a trace of relief mingled with curiosity. His presence made her feel a little less isolated in the sea of judgment around her. The lecture continued, but the unspoken tension between Alex, Maya, and Ryan lingered in the room, foreshadowing deeper conflicts yet to unfold. Outside the window, the roar of a gray air jet taking off echoed faintly, mingling with the rush of wind, a symbolic call to the challenging journey ahead. After the intense training session, Alex found his way to a small break room designated for trainees. The space was simple, with lockers, a large mirror on the wall, and fluorescent lights casting a stark glow. Standing before the mirror, Alex loosened the tie constricting his neck. The light illuminated his face, highlighting his eyes a mix of confidence and uncertainty. He placed both hands on the edge of the sink, leaning forward and staring down, drawing in a deep breath. His hand moved to rub the back of his neck, as though trying to shake off the weight pressing on his mind. Lifting his head, Alex looked into the mirror again. In that moment, the composed and confident facade he worked so hard to maintain began to crack. What emerged instead was raw vulnerability, the inner turmoil of a man grappling with doubts about the challenges he had just stepped into.
"Reality,"
he murmured, the word barely audible in the stillness.
"Am I ready for this?"
Silence followed, his reflection staring back with unspoken questions, unrelenting worries, and the heavy weight of expectation. A faint noise in the hallway broke the stillness, pulling Alex back to the present. He straightened up, adjusting his shirt. His face regained its usual calm demeanor, though a flicker of unresolved thoughts lingered in his eyes. He exited the break room, leaving behind the harsh fluorescent light and his mirrored image. The journey he sought had only just begun, and he knew it would be anything but easy. The training center cafeteria buzzed with laughter and the scrape of chairs. Young trainees gathered in small groups, chatting animatedly, savoring the rare break between sessions. Near the window, in a quiet corner, Maya Johnson sat alone, clutching her slightly worn shoes, trying to fix a frayed shoelace. She glanced around, her gaze lingering on the lively groups of trainees. They seemed to avoid looking her way, a quiet, unspoken invisibility Maya had grown accustomed to. Lowering her head, she focused on the shoes in her hands, but a fleeting shadow of sadness crossed her face. Alex stepped into the cafeteria, his eyes scanning the crowd. When he spotted Maya in the corner, he hesitated for a moment before heading to the self-serve coffee counter. A few moments later, he carried 2 cups of coffee and walked straight to her table. Maya sensed his presence before she looked up. When her eyes met his, a flicker of surprise and guardedness flashed across her face. She wasn't used to anyone approaching her in an environment like this, least of all someone she had barely met. Alex smiled warmly and gently placed a cup of coffee in front of her.
"I noticed you take pretty detailed notes. You seem to know this industry better than I do,"
he said, his voice calm but tinged with genuine admiration. Maya studied him for a moment, as if to ensure his intentions were sincere. Finally, she smiled a small but meaningful smile.
"It's just that I don't have another choice."
She hesitated briefly before continuing, her voice softer.
"My dream depends on this place."
Alex nodded slightly, not pressing further. Pulling out a chair, he sat across from her, cradling his coffee cup in both hands.
"Every dream begins in a difficult place,"
he said, his eyes steady on hers. Maya was taken aback by the sincerity in his voice. She hadn't expected that. In a space often marked by indifference and competition, someone might truly care about her story. For a moment, they sat in silence, finding a rare calm amidst the cafeteria's bustling noise. Though they were practically strangers, the moment forged a subtle connection between two people struggling through their own challenges. Across the room, Ryan Taylor watched them, his lips curling into a faint smirk. His eyes gleamed with a mix of irritation and curiosity as he leaned back in his chair. The cafeteria remained loud and lively, the sound of laughter ringing out from a group of trainees where Ryan sat with a few friends. His occasional glances at Alex and Maya hinted at something brewing in his mind, a plan yet to be formed. At the corner table, Alex stood and nodded to Maya.
"See you at the next training session?"
he said, his voice calm. Maya nodded lightly in return, her smile small but sincere, offering no further words. As Alex walked away, Maya remained seated, her thoughts swirling. She absently turned the coffee cup in her hands, her gaze drifting to the far window. Through the clear glass, she spotted a gray airplane slowly taxiing on the runway before taking off into the deep blue sky. Her eyes followed the plane, carrying the weight of her emotions. Exhaustion from the relentless effort to survive in a harsh environment mingled with fierce determination to persevere and chase her dreams. The plane's engines roared into the sky, powerful yet distant, a reminder of the journey she had chosen. The sound merged with the lively chatter from the other trainees, echoing the stark contrast between Ryan's carefree privilege and Maya's quiet resilience. Maya took a deep breath, her shoulders softening slightly. She knew the path ahead would be anything but easy, but as she watched the plane climb higher, she felt she couldn't afford to stop. Her gaze settled, her eyes brimming with resolve, as the plane's noise faded into the background, leaving a reflective stillness in its wake. In the days that followed, the training sessions grew increasingly intense, revealing the true capabilities of the trainees. Alex, with his enthusiasm and quick learning ability, began to stand out among his peers. Not only did he excel in completing assignments, but he was also always willing to help others, setting himself apart within the group of trainees. In the practical training room, the space was designed to mimic the interior of an actual airplane. Rows of airplane-style seats were neatly arranged under stark white lighting, creating a professional yet tense atmosphere. The trainees stood in groups, listening intently as the instructor explained passenger service procedures. Alex Gray stood in the front row, his focus unwavering as he absorbed every word the instructor said. Determination shone in his eyes, and each of his movements was deliberate and precise. When it was his turn to practice, Alex executed the passenger service tasks smoothly, from checking seat belts to demonstrating the use of oxygen masks. Next to Alex, Maya quietly observed. When she noticed him falter slightly on a minor step, she stepped forward without a word, adjusting the way he held the serving tray. Her gesture carried a subtle hint of concern but maintained enough distance to avoid any misunderstanding about her intentions. At the far corner of the room, Ryan Taylor leaned against the wall, scrolling through his phone as if the lesson meant nothing to him. Occasionally, he cast a glance at Alex, his jealousy evident in the sneer curling at the edge of his lips. The instructor, a seasoned flight attendant with a stern yet fair demeanor, approached Alex after his demonstration. He nodded in approval, his voice firm and encouraging.
"Alex, you've got a knack for this. Keep it up and you'll go far."
Alex nodded in gratitude, a faint smile crossing his lips. But before he could fully savor the moment of pride, Maya leaned in slightly, her voice low but edged with warning.
"Doing too well can be a double-edged sword."
She cast a quick glance toward Ryan.
"Ryan doesn't like being overshadowed."
Alex's brow furrowed slightly as his eyes followed hers. Ryan, still leaning against the wall, wore his familiar sneer, the jealousy in his gaze a silent but unmistakable threat. Maya stepped back, her expression cautious, but she said no more. Alex took a deep breath and refocused on the lesson, though his mind began to churn with new thoughts, not just about the technical challenges of the job, but about the complex dynamics and veiled motives brewing within this environment. In the break area, the soft amber glow of a hanging ceiling light cast a cozy yet subdued atmosphere. The small room held a few simple wooden tables and scattered metal chairs, their arrangement casual and unassuming. Maya sat in a corner, holding a bottle of water, her gaze unfocused as she stared into the distance. The quiet seemed inseparable from her presence in this space, as if solitude had become a familiar companion. Alex walked in, carrying a tray of food. Catching sight of Maya sitting alone, he hesitated for a moment before making his way toward her.
"Is this seat taken?"
he asked, a friendly smile softening his features as he placed the tray on the table. Maya glanced up, a flicker of wariness in her eyes. But something in Alex's gaze spoke of genuine kindness, and after a brief pause, she nodded slightly.
"Go ahead,"
she said, her voice quiet but not entirely cold. Alex settled into the chair across from her, his eyes subtly studying her expression. After a moment of silence, he spoke.
"Do you always sit alone?"
Maya didn't answer immediately. She turned the bottle of water in her hands, her fingers fidgeting with the label. After a deep breath, she finally replied,
"Around here, things aren't as simple as you might think. People like Ryan, they hold power and they know it."
Her voice grew quieter, her eyes lowering as she recounted her experiences.
"I have to take on extra work, even jobs that aren't mine to do, just because they assume I won't push back. They'll stick me with the hardest shifts, and if anything goes wrong, I'm always the one who gets blamed."
Her grip on the bottle tightened momentarily, a silent struggle to keep her emotions in check. Alex rested his chin on his hand, his brow furrowed as he listened. His expression shifted gradually, a mix of empathy and unease emerging. What Maya described was foreign to him, a reality he'd never had to confront.
"No one should be treated like that, especially someone as capable as you,"
Alex said, his tone serious but not overdone. Maya lifted her gaze to meet his, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. A faint, sardonic smile played on her lips.
"You think you could actually change anything?"
she asked, her voice low but sharp, like a challenge. Alex held her gaze, silent for a moment.
"Maybe I don't know what I'll achieve,"
he replied, his tone measured but resolute.
"But that doesn't mean I shouldn't try."
Maya studied him for a few seconds longer, the hint of cynicism in her eyes gradually softening, replaced by a trace of curiosity. She didn't respond right away. Instead, she gave a slight nod and shifted her gaze to the window, where the distant hum of airplane engines echoed from the nearby airport. The tension between them eased, though their exchange had left an indelible mark on both Alex and Maya. Alex realized that the true challenge of his journey lay not just in the work itself, but in confronting injustices he had never fully understood. And for Maya, perhaps for the first time, she felt that in this cold, unyielding environment, she might not be entirely alone. During the training flight, the cramped cabin of the mock airplane felt even tighter with its closely packed rows of seats, leaving only a narrow aisle for movement. The stark white light from the overhead fixtures illuminated the space with an almost clinical harshness, amplifying the tension that seemed to linger in the air like an unwelcome passenger. The trainees, stationed at various points throughout the cabin, worked diligently on tasks meant to test their skills and ability to handle real-life scenarios. Maya stood in the narrow aisle, balancing a carefully arranged tray in her hands. She moved methodically from the front of the cabin to the back, her focus sharp and deliberate. Every step was measured, as though even the smallest misstep might draw unwanted attention or criticism. Meanwhile, Ryan Taylor leaned casually against an empty seat in the middle of the cabin. He made no effort to contribute, his posture radiating an air of leisure that bordered on arrogance. With his signature smugness, Ryan appeared untouched by the pressure of the exercise, treating it as nothing more than an opportunity to assert his unspoken dominance. He observed the other trainees with a detached amusement, as though watching a dull play where he alone had the right to judge. His gaze eventually settled on Maya, who was still occupied with her tray. A sly, mocking smile curled at the corners of his lips, a warning sign of the scathing remarks that were undoubtedly brewing in his mind.
"Maya!"
Ryan called out, his voice deliberately slow and theatrical, dripping with false politeness. The tension in the cabin thickened instantly, the oppressive silence pressing down on everyone. Maya froze mid-step, her head snapping up in disbelief. Her fingers instinctively tightened their grip on the tray, as though bracing herself against an oncoming storm. Ryan sauntered forward, stopping just a few steps from her. He stood with an infuriatingly relaxed demeanor, his expression one of idle superiority.
"You're just the right person for this,"
he said, gesturing lazily toward the small lavatory tucked at the back of the cabin.
"Go clean the bathroom. Do a good job."
His tone was thick with sarcasm, the mockery unmistakable as he savored every word. The cabin seemed to freeze in time. A few trainees exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared to speak up. Maya blinked rapidly, trying to steady herself. Her voice, though slightly shaky, was clear.
"I don't think that's my responsibility."
Ryan crossed his arms, raising an eyebrow with exaggerated slowness, the smirk on his face growing more pronounced.
"Oh, really?"
he drawled, his voice laced with condescension.
"Well, I think it is. After all, tasks like these require someone who's both dedicated and appropriate. And that's you."
Not far away, Alex paused in the middle of his own assignment. His eyes flicked quickly between Maya and Ryan, his jaw tightening as his grip on the nearest seatback hardened. He couldn't stay silent. Alex stepped forward, positioning himself between Maya and Ryan, his voice steady but firm.
"If it's something anyone can do, then I'll do it."
Ryan's eyebrows shot up, momentarily caught off guard. The surprise, however, faded within seconds, replaced by his usual smirk.
"Suit yourself,"
he said airily, though his words carried a thinly veiled sneer.
"But don't let it tarnish your heir to the throne image."
The jab was sharp, but Alex didn't flinch. His gaze remained locked on Ryan, unwavering. Without another word, he turned to Maya, his tone softening as he spoke.
"You don't have to do this."
Maya stood frozen, her wide eyes reflecting a mixture of unease and gratitude. Alex didn't wait for her reply. He turned and strode toward the lavatory, ready to take on the humiliating task Ryan had weaponized against her. Ryan watched Alex walk away, the irritation on his face unmistakable. His smirk returned, but it lacked its usual confidence, his composure visibly shaken. Maya exhaled deeply, trying to steady the emotions that churned inside her. She watched Alex, the burden on her chest feeling slightly lighter. For the first time, she felt a flicker of reassurance and acknowledgement that perhaps, in this harsh and isolating environment, she wasn't entirely alone. At the edges of the cabin, whispers began to ripple among the other trainees. A few glances shifted toward Ryan, their dissatisfaction with his domineering attitude quietly but clearly growing. Ryan, as always, feigned indifference. He leaned back against the seat, a glint of defiance flashing in his eyes, as though silently warning everyone that this was far from over. The management office exuded an air of stern authority, its atmosphere oppressive from the moment one stepped inside. A large dark wood desk sat at the center of the room, its polished surface so pristine it reflected the light from the ceiling lamp above. On the desk, stacks of documents were meticulously arranged, a testament to the manager's precision and discipline. The cold white glow of the overhead light cast sharp shadows, accentuating the harsh lines of the manager's face, a face that radiated control and tolerated no dissent. The manager sat upright behind the desk, his hands resting on its surface, his piercing gaze as sharp as a blade fixed on Alex. Opposite him, Alex stood straight, striving to maintain a composed demeanor, though his eyes betrayed an internal struggle. In his hand, he gripped his intern badge tightly, as if it were the sole anchor for his belief in himself. Alex drew a deep breath, trying to quell the storm of indignation surging within him, but the breath wasn't enough to dissipate the unease swelling in his chest.
You're here to learn.
The manager began, his voice cold and rigid, each word delivered with a measured authority that left no room for argument. He enunciated slowly, deliberately, as if to smother any thought of defiance.
Not to change policy. Focus on your own duties. But it's wrong.
Alex retorted immediately, his voice rising slightly, a note of barely restrained fury escaping his lips. He couldn't ignore the sight of Ryan abusing his privilege or the injustices Maya and perhaps many others faced every day.
We can't just ignore it. This is a real problem and everyone knows it.
The manager's expression remained unchanged, his eyes retaining an unsettling calmness. He leaned forward slightly, his hands clasped on the desk, a posture of absolute control.
Do you think you can change an entire system just because of your sense of fairness?
His tone was more than a challenge, it carried an unspoken warning. Alex pressed his lips together, his gaze locked on the manager's, but the words he had rehearsed in his mind seemed to falter, trapped in his throat. His hands tightened around the small intern badge, his grip so firm his knuckles turned white. In that moment, Alex realized that in this room, in a system as entrenched as gray air, his voice was little more than a faint echo, lost in a vast and indifferent expanse. The conversation ended in a suffocating silence. The manager leaned back in his chair, his gaze indifferent, as though he had dismissed the matter entirely without the need for further input. Alex remained rooted in place for a few moments, his feet feeling as though they were anchored to the ground, before he reluctantly turned and left the room. The hallway outside was long, narrow, and eerily quiet, illuminated by fluorescent lights that reflected off the cold, sterile floor. Each step Alex took echoed faintly, the sound dissipating into the emptiness around him, matching the loneliness that now weighed heavily on his heart. He stopped at a long bench positioned against the wall. His movements were sluggish, burdened by an invisible weight dragging him down. Alex sat, his shoulders slumping as he brought his hands to his face, rubbing it slowly in an attempt to steady himself and banish the thoughts swirling in his mind. Yet the feeling of helplessness clung to him, an unrelenting tide pressing down on his shoulders, making each breath feel heavier than the last. At the airport, the golden hues of sunset spilled across the vast space, bathing everything in a soft, amber glow. Through the enormous glass windows, Alex stood silently, watching a gray-air jet touch down. Its wheels met the tarmac with a brief puff of smoke, the roar of its engines reverberating through the air. Overhead, the soothing yet impersonal voice of the PA system announced flights, blending seamlessly into the charged, stifling atmosphere. In his hand was his intern badge. His fingers gripped it so tightly that the sharp edges bit into his skin. Alex's gaze remained fixed on the plane beyond the glass, but his thoughts drifted back to the confrontation in the management office. He squinted, trying to clear the turmoil in his mind, but the effort only deepened his inner conflict. His teeth pressed into his lower lip, a habit that surfaced whenever he faced difficult decisions.
How can I just stand by and do nothing?
Alex murmured, his words barely audible, spoken more to his conscience than to the world around him. His voice carried the weight of deep anguish, as though he were locked in a silent argument with himself.
But if I speak out, everything will change forever.
The words hung in the air, unanswered. Alex lowered his head, his gaze falling from the aircraft outside the window to the badge in his hand. The small card, embossed with the Grayer logo, was both a symbol of his dreams and a haunting reminder of the injustices he'd witnessed during his brief time as an intern. His hand trembled slightly, not just from the pressure weighing on him, but from a shapeless, creeping fear. If he chose to speak up, if he decided to stand by Maya and oppose Ryan and the system he embodied, what would happen? Would the change be worth risking his own peace and the future he had worked so hard to build? Another plane roared as it ascended, its engines breaking through the silence in Alex's mind. He took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging slightly under the invisible weight of his doubts and fears. Behind him, the airport bustled with the movement of passengers and staff, a stark contrast to Alex's solitary figure, standing still as though he were isolated from the flow of the world. He lifted his head, his eyes returning to the runway, where the sunset still blazed, vivid even as the day waned. In his gaze, the struggle was far from over, but faintly, a spark of resolve began to flicker, fragile yet unmistakable. Alex knew he had to make a choice. And this time, he didn't have the luxury of hesitation. He inhaled deeply, his eyes fixed on the horizon as another plane landed. Inside, his determination to act warred with the helplessness he felt against the unjust system he had come to know. But he understood that the warnings and pressures he had faced couldn't hold him back forever. What Alex didn't foresee, however, was that his next VIP flight would set off a chain of events spiraling far beyond his control. Ryan, in his arrogance and carelessness, had allowed improperly stored luggage to remain in the cabin. When the consequences unfolded, Ryan, true to form, refused to accept responsibility. Instead, he placed the blame squarely on Maya, nearly costing her her job. In the VIP business class cabin, the warm golden glow from the overhead lights reflected off the luxurious interiors, highlighting the opulence designed for the most important passengers. Yet the glamour couldn't mask the tension that hung heavy in the air, stirred by an unexpected incident. A bulky piece of luggage had been placed haphazardly in the overhead compartment, far exceeding the permissible size limits and clearly out of place in such a refined space. The oversized suitcase tilted precariously, creating both an eyesore and a hazard. A few passengers, known for their high expectations of flawless service, cast sharp, disapproving glances toward the luggage and the team of trainee attendants. The flight manager, stern and authoritative, approached the scene. His commanding presence exuded authority, and his sharp gaze seemed to pierce through each member of the trainee crew. His eyes swept across them before settling on Ryan, who stood nearest to the luggage. As always, Ryan exuded a mix of casual indifference and faint irritation, his arms crossed over his chest, as if the situation had nothing to do with him. When the manager addressed him, Ryan didn't bother to explain or take responsibility. Instead, he pointed directly at Maya, his voice laced with insincere nonchalance.
"I told Maya to check it. She must have been daydreaming,"
he said, each word dripping with mockery, his tone smug and dismissive. Maya froze, stunned by the baseless accusation. Her eyes widened in disbelief, and for a moment she was too shocked to respond. The weight of the injustice hit her like a blow, and her expression shifted from bewilderment to anguish, then to quiet fury. Her fingers clenched tightly around the serving tray in her hands, her knuckles turning white. When she finally found her voice, it trembled with a mix of anger and pain.
"I didn't do that."
Maya protested, her gaze locking onto Ryan's. Her voice was steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath it.
"You're the one who insisted it be put there."
Ryan remained unfazed by her words. A smirk curled his lips as if her defense was nothing more than an amusing triviality. The flight manager didn't even glance at Maya for clarification. His voice was cold and final, each word delivered like a slammed door.
"Maya, this is a serious violation. I will report this to upper management. For now, you're removed from this flight."
Maya's attempt to speak again faltered, her voice swallowed by the oppressive atmosphere in the cabin. No one spoke in her defense, and her words seemed to vanish into the void. Her gaze fell to the polished floor, her entire body trembling from the weight of injustice and despair. From a nearby seat, Alex had watched the entire scene unfold. His expression darkened, his anger simmering beneath a composed surface. His hands gripped the armrests tightly, his knuckles pale with restrained emotion. Every fiber of his being urged him to stand up and challenge Ryan, to defend Maya, but he knew that without concrete evidence, speaking up could worsen the situation and jeopardize Maya further. In the tense silence that followed, Alex inhaled deeply, steadying himself. He rose to his feet, stepping toward the flight manager. His eyes burned with quiet determination as he spoke, his voice measured but firm enough to cut through the oppressive air.
"Wait,"
Alex said, the strength in his tone making the manager pause.
"There are cameras. If we review the footage, we'll know exactly who's at fault."
His words froze the room. Ryan's confident smirk wavered for the first time, his expression flickering with a hint of unease. He said nothing, but the shadow of worry in his eyes betrayed him. Maya, still standing frozen, lifted her gaze to Alex. Her eyes brimmed with disbelief and the faintest glimmer of hope, as if she couldn't quite fathom that Alex had chosen this moment, against all odds, to stand up for her. The flight manager, though visibly displeased with Alex's interference, maintained his professional demeanor. Clearing his throat, he spoke in a low, authoritative voice.
"I'll review the footage. For now, everyone return to your positions. This matter will be addressed after."
Alex nodded, offering no further argument. His eyes lingered on Ryan, sending an unmistakable message this time: you won't get away so easily. Ryan, in contrast, fought to maintain his composure. He leaned back against a seat, feigning indifference, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his irritation and unease. Maya watched Alex intently, gratitude and anxiety mingling in her expression. She knew he had just taken a significant risk not just for himself, but for her chance to clear her name. Though she couldn't find the words to express her thanks, she gave him the smallest of nods, a silent acknowledgement of her appreciation. As Alex returned to his seat, the flight resumed, but the atmosphere in the cabin had irrevocably shifted. No one, not the trainees, not the passengers, could focus on anything else. What had just transpired was merely the beginning of a chain of events destined to change everything forever. The narrow surveillance room, with its plain gray walls, was illuminated only by the pale blue light from the security monitors. Images from the airplane's cameras flickered in sequence across the screens, but the cold, sterile glow did little to dispel the oppressive atmosphere that filled the space. Alex sat upright on a rigid swivel chair, his hands clenched tightly on his knees. The glow of the monitors cast sharp shadows across his tense face, emphasizing the weight of his anticipation. Behind him, Maya leaned against the wall, her arms limp at her sides, though a faint tremor betrayed her unease. Her gaze flitted anxiously between the manager and the screens, her expression shifting between fear and hope as every second ticked by without resolution. The flight manager entered the room with his familiar air of authority, his sharp eyes sweeping over Alex and Maya with cold detachment. He took his seat before the array of computers without a word, his focus solely on the keyboard as his fingers struck each key with deliberate precision. The sound of his typing echoed in the suffocating silence. Alex's eyes remained fixed on the monitors as the security footage was queued up. A storm brewed within him, anger and apprehension intertwined, threatening to break free. Beside him, Maya held her breath, as though every ounce of her remaining hope was pinned to the images they were about to see. Time crawled. The screen cycled through different camera angles, but the critical footage from the overhead luggage compartment was nowhere to be found. The manager frowned, his gaze glued to the monitors, though his face betrayed no surprise. Finally, he stopped, exhaling lightly before turning to face Alex and Maya. His voice was devoid of warmth, carrying only cold finality.
"Unfortunately, the footage is corrupted and unrecoverable. There's no evidence to review."
Maya stared at him, her eyes wide with disbelief. Her lips parted as if to protest, but no words came out. Slowly, her arms fell to her sides, her body sagging as though the last shred of her strength had been drained away. Alex, however, refused to let the silence linger. Rising from his seat, he locked eyes with the manager, his tone laced with suspicion.
Corrupted or erased?
The manager hesitated, his gaze narrowing as though weighing Alex's challenge. Then he offered a faint, humorless smile, devoid of sincerity.
You should be careful with accusations like that,
he replied, his voice steady but tinged with warning.
It won't do anyone any good.
Alex didn't look away, his unwavering stare a silent refusal to back down. Maya, on the other hand, remained silent, her face a portrait of despair and helplessness. Both of them knew the truth. The footage hadn't simply been corrupted. It had been deliberately erased. But in this room, power outweighed truth. The manager rose and exited the room without another word. The blue light from the monitors continued to flicker, casting an eerie glow that only deepened the sense of emptiness and futility. Alex sighed heavily and turned to Maya, his eyes filled with guilt. It was as if he blamed himself for allowing her to endure yet another injustice. Maya lowered her head, her voice soft but heavy with emotion.
I knew this would happen, but I still hoped, Alex. I thought this time might be different.
Alex didn't respond immediately. His fists clenched at his sides, his frustration palpable. Then his expression hardened, determination lighting up his eyes.
This time will be different,
he said firmly.
If they erased it, we'll find another way to prove the truth.
Despite knowing the path ahead would be anything but easy, both Alex and Maya understood in that moment that they couldn't afford to stop. The sting of injustice and failure only strengthened their resolve to keep fighting for what was right. In a small cafe near the airport, the dim amber light from a hanging lamp cast a muted glow, shrouding the space in a somber stillness. Outside the glass window, planes continued their steady rhythm of takeoffs and landings, but the bustling energy of the runway felt distant, unable to penetrate the quiet corner of the cafe. Maya sat with her head bowed, both hands cradling a cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. Her gaze was fixed on the table, devoid of life, as though every ounce of energy had been drained from her. Every so often, a deep sigh escaped her lips, amplifying the weight of disappointment and exhaustion she carried. Across from her, Alex sat, his eyes intently fixed on Maya. Concern etched his face, but behind it burned a flicker of determination. Leaning forward, his hands resting on the table, he seemed to be trying to close the emotional gap between them.
What's left to fight for, Alex?
Maya murmured, her voice hoarse and heavy with suppressed pain.
They've won. They always win.
Alex didn't answer immediately. He sat in silence for a few moments, his gaze steady and unwavering. Then he spoke, his voice firm, but laced with gentleness.
If you give up, they'll win forever. But if you stay, at least we still have a chance.
Maya let out a bitter laugh, one that barely resembled joy. She shook her head, her eyes still glued to the table.
A chance at what, Alex? A video that's already been erased. A system rigged against us from the start. How can we fight something that was never meant to let us win?
Alex took a deep breath and straightened in his seat, his gaze steady and resolute.
A chance to show them you're not so easily broken,
he said, his words deliberate and charged with quiet strength.
A chance to prove to yourself that justice isn't something people hand you. It's something you claim for your...
Maya's head lifted for the first time since they'd entered the cafe. Her eyes, weary and bloodshot, met his. There was still fatigue in her gaze, but also a flicker of curiosity, of hope fragile and faint, but undeniably there. Alex pressed on, his tone softening but losing none of its conviction.
I'm not saying it'll be easy. It might even be harder than anything we've imagined. But if you walk away now, you'll always wonder what would have happened if you'd pushed just a little harder. And that, Maya, is worse than failing.
Maya didn't reply, her hands slipping away from the coffee cup to rest on the table. She remained silent, but her expression shifted. No longer vacant and despairing, her eyes now carried the faintest glimmer of resolve, small, tenuous, but present. Alex leaned back in his chair, exhaling in quiet relief. He lifted his own coffee cup and gently tapped it against Maya's.
This isn't just about fairness, Maya. It's about deciding who we are, no matter where the world tries to.
Maya nodded slightly, offering no rebuttal. Though the path ahead remained uncertain, she understood one thing: she wasn't fighting alone anymore. Outside the airport, night had fallen, draping the surroundings in a quiet stillness, broken only by the sound of the wind and the low rumble of airplanes taking off. The distant runway gleamed with endless rows of lights, while the night sky was intermittently illuminated by the blinking lights of ascending aircraft. Maya stood beside Alex, her gaze fixed on a plane slowly lifting off the ground. Her hair was tousled by the wind, strands falling across her face, but they couldn't obscure the shift in her eyes from confusion and turmoil to a growing sense of focus and determination. She exhaled deeply, her fingers gripping the strap of her bag as if anchoring herself.
I used to think about giving up,
Maya said softly, her voice low but carrying clearly in the quiet.
Because some days it feels like this world wasn't made for people like me.
Alex stood next to her, his intern badge still clutched tightly in his hand, a relic of their earlier conversation in the cafe. He turned toward Maya, his eyes alight with both concern and an unwavering determination.
They can erase the video?
Alex said, his voice calm yet resolute.
But they can't erase the truth. We'll find another way, together.
Maya looked at Alex, her eyes wavering briefly, caught in the memories of injustices and frustrations she had endured. But then, as if a light sparked within her, her gaze sharpened, growing stronger and more resolute.
You're right,
Maya replied, her voice still soft but now carrying an unmistakable firmness.
I won't let them take my dreams or my dignity.
Alex allowed himself a small, knowing smile, nodding in agreement. He could see that his words had reached her, and he knew that this wasn't just a fleeting moment, it was the start of something far greater. They stood in silence for a while, letting the rumble of the departing plane fill the space between them. The roar overhead was powerful, almost defiant, a reminder that their journey filled with challenges yet brimming with possibility was only beginning. Maya turned to glance at Alex briefly before stepping away, her footsteps echoing steadily against the concrete. Alex followed, walking alongside her, the two of them now moving in unison like comrades preparing to face the battles ahead. Under the dim glow of the airport's lights, their silhouettes grew smaller in the distance, but they remained unyielding. It was the image of two people who had found strength in solidarity and a hope that refused to be extinguished. As Alex walked, he glanced upward at the sky, where planes continued their relentless ascents, carrying countless dreams and aspirations. A new understanding began to take shape within him. This fight was not one that could be resolved in a day or with a single confrontation. It would require strategy, patience, and an eye for the smallest cracks in the seemingly unshakable system. Watching Maya's determined but cautious stride ahead of him, Alex realized he wasn't just fighting for her. He was fighting for the very values he believed in. For the first time, he questioned whether he had the strength to face what lay ahead, not just with his will, but with the wisdom to navigate the storm. The wind picked up, carrying with it the chill of the night, but within Alex, a plan began to form. If they couldn't rely on the evidence that had been erased, they would create new evidence. He resolved that, from this moment on, he would document every injustice, every buried truth. Each fragment would become part of a larger picture that only they could piece together. The night sky ahead seemed darker and more expansive, but Alex no longer felt fear. A faint smile crossed his face, not because the path had become easier, but because he knew he was ready. Would Alex's quiet, determined steps be enough to shake the foundations of the injustice engulfing Grayer? This journey was no longer just a fight for Maya, it was a test of Alex's resolve, his courage, and his belief in the change he sought to create. In the quiet office after hours, the glow of a single desk lamp illuminated the workspace, creating a small circle of light amidst the vast expanse of shadowy darkness. Alex sat tucked away in a corner, his chair slightly pushed back to ensure no one could easily spot him from outside the room. In front of him lay an open notebook, its pages filled with tightly written notes, each line carrying the weight of careful thought and intent. His gaze was sharp, devoid of the impatience or impulsiveness he once possessed. Instead, his expression held a quiet resolve and razor-sharp focus. Pinned to the corkboard above the desk were photographs and notes, meticulously organized pieces of a larger puzzle Alex was assembling. Snippets of information, from the discriminatory treatment Maya endured to Ryan's arrogant behavior, were woven together into a comprehensive picture of the systemic injustices festering within Grayer. Alex held a pen in one hand, methodically flipping through the pages of his notebook with the other. His eyes darted to the wall clock, checking the time to ensure he wouldn't be interrupted. Each incident, every action from Ryan's abuse of authority to management's mishandling of complaints was documented with precision, down to the exact dates and times. Beside the notebook, the faint glow of his computer screen cast a pale light on Alex's face, accentuating the lines of determination etched across it. On the screen, he scrolled through an internal document from Grayer, poring over company policies regarding the rights and responsibilities of the flight crew. By cross-referencing these policies with his observations, Alex uncovered glaring discrepancies, loopholes that the system exploited to shield those in power while leaving others vulnerable.
They can play their power games?
Alex murmured, his voice low but steely with resolve, his eyes never leaving the screen.
But I have the truth, one step at a time.
He closed the notebook, his movements deliberate as he set his pen down gently on the desk. Yet his gaze lingered on the corkboard, where the faces of those impacted by the injustice stared back at him. Maya's face stood out, the resilient flight attendant crushed under the weight of systemic oppression. Her image, along with those of other trainees who suffered similar fates, seemed to ignite something deeper within Alex. The desk lamp's unwavering light reflected the quiet flame smoldering within him. Alex knew that this fight would demand more than courage. It would require patience, strategy, and a relentless pursuit of justice. This time he was ready to start with the smallest of steps. In the VIP lounge of Grayer, soft lighting reflected off the elegantly designed walls, creating an atmosphere of both luxury and comfort. The gentle strains of piano music filled the air, blending seamlessly with the quiet murmurs of first-class passengers relaxing before their flights. Maya moved gracefully between the rows of seats, exuding confidence and professionalism. Dressed impeccably in her flight attendant uniform, every step she took conveyed poise and focus. A demanding group of passengers had just ordered a complex drink, but Maya showed no signs of hesitation. With a light smile, she swiftly and precisely prepared the order, her hands working deftly. Her eyes remained sharp, catching every detail to ensure perfection. When the drink was placed on the table, one of the passengers took a sip and nodded in approval. Murmurs of admiration rose from those seated nearby, and a few appreciative glances lingered on Maya. She offered a slight bow in thanks, her smile calm and composed, yet her eyes reflected a newfound confidence, a feeling she hadn't experienced in a long time. From a distance, Alex stood near the counter, quietly observing. Pride was evident on his face as he watched Maya handle every situation flawlessly. He knew this moment wasn't just a routine professional evaluation, it was an opportunity for Maya to prove her true worth. When the assessment ended, a senior Grayer executive who had been observing the entire process stood and approached Maya. His expression was stern, but there was a hint of satisfaction in his demeanor.
Maya,
he said, his voice firm and deliberate.
this is exactly what Grayer needs. Professionalism and dedication like this. Well done.
Maya's eyes widened slightly in surprise, but she quickly composed herself. She offered a modest nod, her voice steady yet tinged with emotion.
Thank you, sir. I'm just doing my best to fulfill my duties.
The executive nodded in approval, shaking her hand firmly before returning to his seat. Maya stood still for a moment, letting his words sink in. The praise felt like a powerful validation that her persistence and hard work had finally been recognized. Alex walked over, a proud smile lighting up his face.
You did it, Maya?
He said, his voice brimming with pride. Maya turned to him, her eyes bright yet humble.
It feels amazing, but
She paused, offering a small smile.
I know there's still more to be done, and we'll keep doing it.
Alex replied, his gaze steady and full of determination. The soft piano music continued to play in the lounge, blending with the distant hum of airplane engines, a reminder that their journey was far from over. But now, they carried with them the strength of small victories as they moved forward. The Grayer employee lounge buzzed with rare liveliness. Voices chattered excitedly, punctuated by bursts of laughter that filled the room, creating an unusually joyous atmosphere. Near the coffee machine, Maya stood, her crisp flight attendant uniform enhancing her aura of confidence and professionalism. A radiant smile graced her face as she chatted warmly with a group of colleagues gathered around her. Her light laughter blended harmoniously with their genuine congratulations, forming a melody of triumph that spoke to the relentless effort and success she had earned. But in a shadowed corner of the room, Ryan sat alone on a leather chair near the wall. His back leaned against the seat, one leg crossed over the other, idly twirling a pen between his fingers. Yet his sharp eyes never left Maya. The harsh white light from the overhead fixtures cast an unforgiving glare on his face, emphasizing the scowl etched deeply into his features. Discontent and darkness smoldered in his gaze, fixed solely on her. Ryan clenched his jaw, his expression tightening with every note of Maya's laughter. The sound tore through him, each burst like a fresh wound, deepening the bitterness that churned in his chest. He ground his teeth together, unable to block out the scene before him. Maya, once someone he had dismissed as weak and insignificant, now basking in the respect and admiration of their peers. Each congratulatory pat on her shoulder, each smile directed her way, was another blow to his fragile pride. The noise grated against him, building to a crescendo of irritation until his spinning pen abruptly stilled in his hand. He gripped it tightly, the sharp tip pressing into his palm, but the sting barely registered. His mind was consumed by a dark, festering thought that had begun to take shape. A twisted smile crept across Ryan's face, the corner of his mouth curling into a cruel smirk. He pulled out his phone, his fingers moving swiftly across the screen as he composed a message to an ally within Grayer's ranks, a mid-level employee who had aided him in minor schemes before. The message was sent within seconds, but Ryan's predatory gaze remained locked on Maya. Moments later, his phone vibrated. Ryan glanced around, his eyes sweeping over the faces of his colleagues to ensure no one was paying attention, before rising from his chair and slipping into a secluded corner of the room.
You're sure about this? This isn't a game.
The voice on the other end of the line said, laced with clear apprehension. Ryan chuckled dryly, the sound hollow and devoid of humor.
Just do it,
he said, his voice low but laced with icy resolve.
They need to learn a lesson. She thinks she's so untouchable. Let's see how she handles it when everything falls apart.
There was a pause on the other end, followed by a hesitant sigh.
Fine, but you're taking full responsibility if this goes south? I'm not getting dragged into something bigger than I signed up for.
Ryan smirked and ended the call without a response. He stood in the dim corner, his hand brushing his chin, his eyes gleaming with malicious satisfaction as he imagined Maya's downfall. The vision of her faltering under pressure, humiliated in front of everyone, brought a chilling sense of pleasure. He took a deep breath before returning to his seat, his expression colder, harder than before. He muttered under his breath, his voice almost inaudible, but filled with venom.
"Just wait, Maya. Even the brightest stars burn out."
Outside the lounge window, another gray airplane took off, leaving a long white trail against the fading light of the sky. But within that seemingly serene setting, a sinister plan had been set in motion, one destined to thrust Maya and Alex into their most daunting challenge yet. The gray airplane cruised steadily through the sky, cutting through thick white clouds. The economy cabin was enveloped in the usual mid-flight calm, punctuated only by the steady hum of the engines, the soft rustle of turning pages, and the occasional murmur of passengers. Alex and Maya worked in tandem, moving gracefully through the aisles, exchanging glances and small smiles as they attended to the travelers. Maya bent down to retrieve a tray of drinks from the service cart, her hands swift but precise, her eyes never leaving the passengers in front of her. Nearby, Alex stood close to the overhead luggage compartments, his gaze darting briefly to Ryan, who leaned casually against a seat near the cabin door. Ryan's face was cool and composed, though a faint air of smugness lingered in his posture. From the rear of the cabin, a small beep broke the stillness, a warning from the safety detection system. For a moment, the entire cabin seemed to freeze. Alex turned toward the sound, spotting a flashing red indicator on the safety monitor near the aft luggage compartment.
"Luggage safety alert,"
Alex said quietly, his voice low but firm enough for Maya to hear. She straightened, a flicker of tension crossing her eyes before she nodded and moved swiftly toward the signal. Ryan pushed himself off the seat, walking forward with a calm, almost disinterested expression. He feigned a glance at the system, then turned back to Alex and Maya with a faint, crooked smile.
"Probably a false alarm, but if it isn't..."
He trailed off, gesturing lazily toward a black suitcase in the nearest compartment. Alex stepped toward the suitcase, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the situation. It was a large, black case, hastily placed and clearly out of position. He glanced at Maya, who had already retrieved a safety scanner to check for any potential threats.
"Ryan, this isn't where this luggage is supposed to be,"
Alex said, his tone calm but laden with implication. Ryan shrugged, an air of mock innocence hanging over him.
"Well, just deal with it. Probably nothing, though,"
he added with a smirk.
"Maybe it's better to open it in front of the passengers. Show them how dedicated Greer is to safety."
The moment Ryan's words landed, a nearby passenger overheard and raised his voice.
"What? Unsafe luggage? What's going on?"
The passenger's alarm acted like a spark to dry tinder. Heads turned, eyes widened, and a ripple of murmurs spread through the cabin. The tension thickened as worry etched itself onto the faces of the passengers. Maya took a deep breath, her voice steady as she addressed the growing concern.
"Please remain calm,"
she said firmly, her tone professional and clear.
"We're handling the situation. There's no reason to worry."
Alex cast a sidelong glance at Maya, admiring her composure under pressure, though his own eyes stayed locked on Ryan. Taking a step closer to him, Alex's voice carried a hint of sarcasm.
"Interesting advice, Ryan. As someone responsible for this flight, suggesting we open suspicious luggage in front of the passengers, that's your idea of safety."
Ryan's eyes narrowed slightly, his smirk never faltering.
"I just believe in transparency, don't you?"
Maya knelt beside the suitcase, carefully using the scanner to assess its contents. Ryan's words lingered in her mind like a veiled threat, but she refused to let them distract her. As the scanner emitted another warning beep, Maya's expression hardened, suspicion lighting her eyes.
"Alex,"
Maya called softly, her voice steady but resolute. Alex moved to her side, crouching to inspect the scanner's results. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The suitcase didn't belong to any passenger on the flight manifest. He frowned, his jaw tightening as his gaze flicked back to Ryan. Ryan stood nearby, his expression composed, though the faint twitch of his lips betrayed a suppressed grin. Another passenger stood up, his voice trembling with concern.
"What's happening? I heard an alarm."
Maya rose, turning to face the passenger with calm authority.
"Everything is under control. Please remain seated and don't be alarmed."
Alex placed his hand on the suitcase, careful not to open it yet. Instead, he locked eyes with Maya.
"We need to run further checks,"
he said, his voice laden with meaning. Maya nodded, but they both knew the truth. This was no simple oversight. It was deliberate, part of a carefully laid plan, and Ryan was at its center. The murmurs from the passengers persisted, but Maya and Alex struggled to maintain their composure as they grappled with the situation. Ryan stood with his arms crossed, leaning against a nearby seat, his cold, detached gaze fixed on them like a dispassionate observer. In the increasingly stifling atmosphere of the cabin, Alex knew that any misstep could spiral into irreversible consequences. Yet, he also understood that if this was Ryan's doing, it wouldn't stop at merely causing panic. There was something far more dangerous at play. The small meeting room inside the airport was significantly quieter than the chaos that had engulfed the earlier flight. White light from the overhead lamp cast a stark glow, highlighting the tense faces that still bore the strain of the incident. Maya sat at one corner of the table, her breath still uneven, her hand gripping a glass of water that Alex had just handed her. Her gaze was fixed on the table, as if trying to banish the fresh memories of the cabin's turmoil. Alex sat beside her, his face no longer marked by the tension from before. Instead, a quiet calm had settled over him. He looked at Maya with a gaze full of empathy, though there was also a trace of pride in his eyes, a pride in the way she had handled herself in the crisis.
"You did well,"
Alex said softly, breaking the heavy silence. Maya glanced up at him, her expression momentarily touched by gratitude, though she said nothing. A beat passed, and the silence returned, heavy with anticipation, as if they were waiting for something or someone to arrive and shed light on the situation. The door swung open. Ryan entered, his expression carefully neutral, though his steps faltered slightly, and his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease. He cast a quick glance at Alex and Maya before averting his gaze and settling into a chair opposite them. Moments later, Grayr's senior director stepped in, his commanding presence filling the room. His sharp eyes swept over everyone, lingering on Ryan just a moment longer before he strode to the head of the table. He placed a stack of documents down with a decisive thud.
"Ryan,"
the director said, his voice low and authoritative.
"explain. What happened on this flight?"
Ryan flinched slightly but quickly masked it, regaining his usual air of confidence. He offered a faint smile, placing his hands on the table as though to project transparency.
"It was a minor incident, sir,"
he said, his voice steady but measured, as if carefully choosing his words.
"A baggage alarm malfunctioned, but there was no real danger. I coordinated with the team to address it swiftly."
Maya frowned but stayed silent, her eyes fixed on Ryan. They no longer held fear or uncertainty, but instead carried a steely resolve. The director raised an eyebrow, clearly dissatisfied with the explanation. His gaze shifted to Alex and Maya, silently inviting them to elaborate if they wished. Alex met the director's eyes, then glanced at Ryan, a subtle smile playing at his lips. Slowly, he leaned back in his chair, lacing his fingers together as though deliberating his next move. But instead of speaking, he turned to Maya and whispered just loud enough for her to hear.
"We're not letting him off the hook. This is just the beginning."
Maya turned to Alex, a glimmer of determination lighting up her eyes. She nodded, saying nothing more, but in her heart, she knew this moment marked a turning point. Ryan, sensing the unspoken shift, narrowed his eyes. His gaze darted between Alex and Maya, suspicion flickering across his face, though he held his tongue. In the tense stillness of the room, as the overhead light cast its unrelenting glow, everyone felt the mounting pressure. Silent questions lingered in the air: who was telling the truth, who was lying, and what would happen next. Alex and Maya sat steadfast, unyielding. In their hearts, a quiet flame burned, not only from the injustices they had endured, but also from a resolute refusal to let power shield wrongdoing. But they both knew the real storm was yet to come. Across the table, Ryan, his outward calm intact but his eyes sharp, was already plotting his next move, a more dangerous, calculated strike. Just days later, on a VIP flight, the stakes escalated dramatically. Ryan, acting as the flight manager, orchestrated a severe security breach, plunging the situation into chaos. But he didn't stop there. He swiftly shifted the blame onto Alex, who was supervising the affected area. Maya, working alongside Alex on that flight, was thrust into the heart of the crisis. She knew exactly what was unfolding, but also realized this wasn't merely a power play, it was a direct assault on their dignity and integrity. The business class cabin of the VIP flight descended into chaos as the piercing sound of the security alarm echoed through the air. Red warning lights flashed incessantly, fueling murmurs of concern among passengers strapped into their seats. Some, unable to mask their fear, stood up and turned to the cabin crew for answers. Alex and Maya, who had been assisting passengers nearby, rushed toward the main luggage compartment, the source of the alarm. Maya's breaths came in shallow gasps as she spotted a large suitcase precariously perched, clearly bypassed in the security checks.
How did this even get here?
Maya murmured, her tone shifting from surprise to suspicion. Ryan appeared from behind, his hands clasped behind his back, his demeanor unnervingly calm. He raised an eyebrow as his eyes swept over the suitcase, then turned toward the passengers and the cabin supervisor who had just arrived.
This falls squarely on Alex and Maya's team,
he said smoothly, his voice laced with subtle blame.
I specifically reminded them to double-check everything. Clearly, they were careless.
Maya froze, the weight of his words pressing down on her like a suffocating fog. She spun around, her eyes blazing with fury as she stared Ryan down.
You're lying,
she snapped, her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles turned white.
You're the one who skipped the checks. I saw you.
Before Maya could finish, the cabin supervisor, a stern-faced middle-aged man, raised a hand, cutting her off.
Enough?
He said firmly, his voice low but commanding.
This is not the time for arguments. We're dealing with a serious security issue. Everyone needs to focus on resolving this first.
Alex, standing silently beside Maya, observed the unfolding scene with a darkened gaze. He could see through Ryan's facade. Every calculated move screamed of premeditation. Alex was certain this was no coincidence.
Check the security cameras,
Alex said at last, his voice restrained but unyielding.
They'll show exactly what happened.
Ryan shrugged, feigning indifference.
I'm only concerned about everyone's safety,
he replied, a crooked smile tugging at his lips.
But if you think the cameras will clarify things, by all means.
The cabin supervisor signaled to another crew member to report the incident to ground control, while Maya and Alex worked to contain the situation, calming and explaining things to the increasingly anxious passengers. An older passenger stood up, his face tense, his voice louder than normal from fear.
What's going on? Is there danger? Why is the alarm going off?
Maya drew a steady breath, her voice soothing yet firm.
Sir, please remain calm. We've identified the source of the alert and are addressing it. There's no need to worry.
As Maya reassured the passengers, Alex stepped back slightly, his sharp gaze fixed on Ryan. A sense of helplessness churned within him, but so did a growing determination. He knew that unless they uncovered the truth, both he and Maya would be dragged down by this treachery. The alarm lights began to fade as the situation came under temporary control, but the tension in the cabin remained palpable. Maya turned to Alex, her voice tightly controlled.
What do we do now? He can't keep getting away with this.
Alex clenched his fists, his voice low but resolute.
We'll see this through, Maya. But this time, we have to be smarter. He's playing a dangerous game.
Ryan, standing a few feet away, cast a sideways glance at Alex and Maya, his lips curling into a dangerous smirk. Yet, when his eyes met Alex's unyielding stare, the smirk faltered for just a moment. The flight continued on its path, but in their hearts, Alex and Maya knew this was far from over. Ryan's intentions were clear now, and the battles ahead would be harder, riskier, and fraught with peril. The emergency meeting room was suffused with an oppressive atmosphere. The harsh ceiling lights illuminated the long wooden table where everyone was seated, but their brightness could not dispel the shadow of injustice hanging over the scene. Richard Taylor, exuding authority with a calm, almost statue-like demeanor, sat at the center. His chair was a symbol of absolute power. Beside him, Ryan sat with his arms crossed, a smug smirk flickering on his lips. Across from them, Maya stood with her back straight, her hands trembling slightly, but her gaze remained resolute. Yet her reddened eyes betrayed the anguish and helplessness roiling within her. Next to her, Alex clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles turned white, his furious eyes fixed on Richard and Ryan. Richard tapped his fingers slowly on the tabletop, his gaze sweeping across the room before settling on Maya and Alex. Clearing his throat, he began with a voice so cold it seemed to deepen the room's oppressive silence.
After reviewing the situation,
he said, his tone low and unyielding,
I requested a re-evaluation of the security footage from the recent VIP flight. Unfortunately, the security system experienced a severe technical failure, and the video related to the incident has been corrupted. There is no visual evidence left to examine.
Alex gritted his teeth but held back, waiting for him to continue. Richard's piercing gaze lingered on Alex and Maya, underscoring his complete control.
However,
he continued,
based on statements from Ryan and several other witnesses, it's evident that your team, Alex and Maya, failed to properly conduct baggage security checks. This negligence resulted in a hazardous situation that is utterly unacceptable on any ground.
Ryan's smirk grew more pronounced as his disdainful eyes flicked toward Maya. Maya clenched her fists, striving to maintain her composure, but her voice, when she spoke, was icy and defiant.
I don't accept this,
she said, her gaze locking firmly onto Richard.
I know the truth. I performed my duties accurately and followed every protocol. It was Ryan who bypassed the security checks.
Richard raised an eyebrow, his displeasure at her defiance evident.
You may believe that, Maya?
He replied, his tone soft but laden with authority.
But here, we operate on evidence and procedure. Regrettably, at this time, there is no evidence to support your claim.
Maya bit her lip, her vision blurring, but she refused to show any weakness in front of them. Alex could no longer stay silent. He stood abruptly, his eyes blazing with fury, his voice shaking with indignation.
This is not the truth,
he shouted, meeting Richard's gaze head-on.
This is manipulation. You're protecting your son by making us scapegoats.
Richard remained unfazed by the accusation, merely shaking his head. His voice was steady and more menacing for its calmness.
Watch your words, Alex. This is not the place for personal outbursts.
Maya stepped forward, standing beside Alex, her voice now calm but cutting.
If there's no evidence, why am I being suspended?
She asked, her words as sharp as a blade aimed at Richard's justification.
This is a temporary measure,
Richard replied, sitting straighter, his fingers interlocked on the table.
We need to ensure there's no recurrence of such a dangerous situation. That requires a thorough internal investigation.
Maya exhaled deeply, her eyes brimming with disappointment but retaining their unwavering resolve.
I won't stop,
she said, her words ringing with determination.
You can suspend me, but I will prove the truth.
Alex nodded in agreement, his gaze shifting to Maya with silent support.
We won't let them get away with this,
he murmured, loud enough for Ryan to hear. Ryan glanced at Alex, the smirk on his lips faltering ever so slightly, a flicker of unease flashing in his eyes. The room fell silent as Richard stood, his tone final as he brought the meeting to a close.
Today's meeting is adjourned. Maya, your suspension takes effect immediately. Alex, if you wish to retain your position, I advise you to reconsider your recent statements.
He turned and walked away, Ryan following behind but not without casting a sneering glance at Maya and Alex. As the door closed, Maya's hands relaxed, trembling as she fought back tears that threatened to spill. Alex turned to her, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his voice low but resolute.
We won't give up. This is just the beginning.
The old security room was tucked away in an abandoned corner of the Grayer building, its yellowish light barely illuminating the dusty relics of its past purpose. Ancient monitors, broken control panels, and tangled cables lay strewn across the floor, forgotten remnants of a once functional system. Alex stepped inside, carefully easing the creaky door shut to avoid making any noise. His eyes darted around the dim, silent space, alert to any sign of movement. He paused, listening intently. Beyond the echo of his own footsteps, there was nothing but the oppressive quiet of neglect. In the far corner of the room, an antiquated computer sat on a rickety desk, its dull screen a silent witness to everything that had once transpired here. Small and unassuming among the larger, obsolete equipment, it was Alex's only hope now. He approached it cautiously, brushing off a thick layer of dust from the keyboard before lowering himself onto the cold, hard chair. The pale blue glue glow of the screen flickered to life, casting a faint light over Alex's face. His expression, resolute but shadowed with worry, came into sharp focus. His fingers flew across the keyboard, each keystroke ringing out in the stillness like fragile beats of hope.
They might have erased the data from the main system,
Alex muttered under his breath, as though to reassure himself.
But nothing truly disappears if you know where to look.
One folder after another opened before him, each revealing files that offered more frustration than promise. Sweat began to bead on Alex's forehead, tracing a path down his temple. Still, he didn't stop. His eyes scanned the screen with relentless precision, combing through corrupted files and incomplete records for anything that might give him the edge. Time dragged on, each passing minute heightening the tension in the room. The air felt heavier, his heartbeat louder, his breath shorter, as if the walls themselves were closing in. But just as his hope began to waver, a small icon suddenly appeared in the corner of the screen, an automatic backup file, recorded before the system purge. Alex froze, his breath caught in his chest. He stared at the icon, unsure if he could trust what he was seeing. Then, with a decisive click, he opened the file. The video began to play, and as the images unfolded, a flicker of triumph lit up his eyes. There it was Ryan, deliberately bypassing the security protocols to load unchecked luggage into the cargo hold. His face was unmistakable on the grainy footage, his calm demeanor laced with calculated malice. A shiver ran down Alex's spine, but he pushed it aside, his lips curling into a faint, victorious smile.
They forgot that nothing truly disappears from a system,
he said softly, his voice now carrying the weight of vindication. Wasting no time, Alex connected the computer to the internal network. His fingers moved swiftly as he composed an email, the clattering of the keyboard cutting through the room's silence like a rallying cry. He attached the incriminating video, addressing it to the one person in the leadership team he trusted, someone he knew would side with truth. untouchable by Richard's influence. In the email, Alex typed a single powerful line.
"This is the truth. Let it be seen."
With a deep breath, he pressed send. The weight on his shoulders began to lift as he leaned back in his chair, exhaling heavily, as though releasing all the pressure that had been suffocating him. The room remained dark and still, the blue glow of the screen reflecting off his face, but in Alex's heart, that light was growing, sparking a flame of hope and determination. He stood, his movement steadier, his gaze sharpened with resolve.
"Ryan and Richard's game isn't over?"
He murmured to himself, his voice low but fierce.
"But this time, we have the weapon to fight back."
Leaving the room, Alex stepped into the dim hallway beyond, the oppressive stillness of the security room fading behind him. Yet he knew that his actions today were more than a small step toward justice. They were the first strike in a larger battle, one that could finally give him and Maya the chance to reclaim the truth and the dignity they deserved. The main conference room of Grayer was cloaked in a chilling silence. Cold white light from the ceiling illuminated the long table, casting sharp shadows on the tense faces of everyone present. The company's leadership sat rigid, their sharp gazes locked onto Richard Taylor and Ryan Taylor. Richard, though trying to maintain his usual composed exterior, gripped the arms of his chair tightly, betraying his unease. His gravelly voice broke the silence, attempting to dismiss the tension.
"I maintain that this video has been doctored. This is nothing more than an attempt to tarnish Ryan's reputation, and by extension, our family's name. There is no evidence to suggest what we've just seen is genuine."
Ryan, seated beside him, had entirely lost his trademark confidence. His face was pale, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. His trembling hands clutched the edge of the table, a desperate attempt to cling to the last threads of his crumbling facade of power. Across the table, Alex slowly rose to his feet. A few members of the leadership team exchanged surprised glances as they turned to him not only for what he had just exposed, but for the quiet authority radiating from his stance. This was not the posture of a mere flight attendant trainee. Maya, sitting beside Alex, couldn't hide her astonishment. Her eyes remained fixed on him, her hand slipping from the edge of the table as she caught the determined expression etched across his face. There was something in his demeanor, something she had never noticed before. Alex stepped forward, his eyes sweeping across the room before settling on Richard and Ryan. His voice broke the oppressive silence, steady and powerful, each word cutting through the tension like a blade.
"Richard Taylor,"
Alex began, his voice ringing with quiet intensity, shattering the suffocating atmosphere in the room.
"You have power, I won't deny that. But power, no matter how great, cannot bury the truth. You claim the video is doctored? Then explain how it clearly shows Ryan, your son, deliberately bypassing security protocols to load unchecked baggage into the cargo hold. That action is unmistakable. The truth is not something you can bend or bury under the weight of your influence."
Richard's eyes narrowed, his cold gaze attempting to pierce through Alex. His knuckles whitened as his grip on the chair tightened, but his voice remained steady, laced with disdain.
"You have no standing here."
He sneered, his tone attempting to dominate the room.
"Who are you to challenge me? You're nothing. A flight attendant trainee, a nobody."
Alex's lips curled into a faint smile, his calm unshaken by Richard's words. A flicker of resolve shone in his eyes, deflecting Richard's attempt to diminish him.
"A flight attendant trainee,"
he repeated softly, his voice even but carrying the weight of defiance.
"Yes, that's the role I chose, but not because I am the nobody you think I am."
The room plunged into a heavy, suffocating silence. Every pair of eyes turned to Alex, waiting for an explanation that could upend everything. Maya's hands fell from the table, her wide eyes fixed on Alex. Her lips parted, as though to speak, but no words came. Ryan, seated beside Richard, visibly recoiled, his pale face betraying his growing panic. His gaze darted between Alex and his father, disbelief and dread warring in his expression.
I am Alex Gray.
Alex declared, each word clear and resolute, ringing in the otherwise silent room. His voice carried an authority that silenced all doubts.
Son of William Gray, the founder and CEO of Grayer.
The room erupted with a wave of stunned disbelief. The leadership members, who had been silently observing, now betrayed their shock. Their eyes widened as they stared at Alex, their expressions shifting from skepticism to alarm, as if they were witnessing the impossible. Maya turned to Alex, her eyes sparkling with a mix of emotions: shock, admiration, and something deeper.
Alex,
she whispered, her voice trembling with unspoken thoughts. But the words caught in her throat, her mind still reeling from the truth she had just learned. Ryan, on the other hand, sank deeper into his chair, his eyes bulging with panic. His lips trembled as he stammered,
"No, simply impossible, it can't be."
His voice cracked with desperation as he cast a frantic glance toward his father, seeking reassurance. But this time, Richard had none to give. Richard struggled to maintain his composure, his once steady hands now trembling. His cold, calculating demeanor cracked, and his eyes glinted with anger and unease.
"You're lying,"
he spat, but his voice lacked its usual commanding edge. Alex stepped closer, his sharp gaze boring into Richard.
"You can verify it if you like,"
he replied, his tone steady yet unyielding, like a judge delivering a verdict.
"I chose to hide the name Gray so I could see how this company truly operates. Not the version propped up by the power my family built, and now I know. Grayer has been twisted by your influence and your son's greed."
The tension in the room tightened further, suffocating those present. Maya took a deep breath, her eyes fixed on Alex. Everything began falling into place the way he remained calm under pressure, the confidence that never seemed to match his position, and above all, the unshakable resolve he had shown from the beginning. One of the leadership members, who had just received the incriminating video in his email, rose to his feet, his hands pressed firmly against the table as he spoke, his voice carrying a weight that silenced all dissent.
"Richard, your excuses no longer hold water?"
he said firmly.
As founder, William Gray left behind clear principles for this company. It's time we conduct a full investigation into everything."
Maya stood as well, her voice firm and impassioned as she defended Alex.
"Alex isn't just fighting for himself,"
she said, her words cutting through the tension.
"He's fighting to protect the values Grayer was built upon."
Richard clenched his teeth, his eyes blazing with fury, but no words came. Across from him, Ryan sat with his head bowed, his face pale and drained of all defiance, his hands gripping the edge of the table, as though holding on for dear life. The conference room fell into a silence so heavy it seemed to drain all sound from the air, leaving only the weight of strained breaths and tense gazes that followed every unfolding moment. Slowly, Maya rose to her feet, her hands resting lightly on the table to steady herself. The overhead light cast down on her, highlighting a face marked by exhaustion, but radiating with unshakable determination. Her voice trembled as she began, but each word she spoke carried clarity and strength, laden with the weight of the injustices she had endured.
"Grayer,"
she started, her tone rough with emotion,
"was once the greatest dream of my life. As a flight attendant, I dreamed of working for a company I could trust, a place where people could soar alongside their dream."
She paused, her gaze traveling across the faces of the leadership team, locking eyes with each member, as if trying to reach into their consciences.
"But that dream turned into a nightmare."
A few around the table lowered their heads, unable to meet her gaze as she continued.
"I've seen talented, dedicated colleagues treated unfairly simply because they lacked the power to speak up. I've watched people like Ryan Taylor,"
she said, her piercing gaze flicking toward him,
"abuse their positions to trample over others. What I've faced isn't just discrimination or insults. It's a system of abuse where the truth is twisted and core values are trampled.
Ryan flinched at the mention of his name. His eyes darted nervously to Richard, seeking solace in his father's presence. But for the first time, Richard didn't meet his son's gaze. He sat motionless, his fingers tightly intertwined, masking his powerlessness. Maya took a deep breath to steady herself before pressing on. Her voice grew stronger, carrying a defiance that filled the room.
I am not the only one. How many employees, flight attendants, technicians, even interns, have suffered the same? They don't speak out, not because they don't see the wrongs, but because they fear no one will stand with them. But today,
she glanced at Alex, who watched her with pride and encouragement.
Today, I won't stay silent anymore. I believe gray hair can be better, but only if we have the courage to face the truth and refuse to turn a blind eye to what's wrong.
The room remained silent, her words settling over the leaders like a storm cloud. Some lowered their heads further, their faces reflecting discomfort and inner conflict. Maya's speech wasn't just an accusation, it was a plea for change. Ryan, now stripped of any composure, cast another desperate look at his father. His eyes flickered with panic and hopelessness as he realized the situation was spiraling beyond his control. The commanding voice of the senior director finally broke the suffocating quiet.
Thank you, Maya,
he said, his tone measured but firm, resonating with authority.
What you've said cannot be ignored. We will launch a full investigation into the issues raised today. At Grayer, no one, not even those at the highest positions, is above the law.
Richard remained silent, his expression hard and unreadable, though his hands clenched the edge of the table so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His simmering fury was palpable. Ryan lowered his head, his face pale, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Alex stepped to Maya's side, placing a hand on her shoulder, a silent gesture of solidarity and strength. Together, they walked out of the room, their footsteps echoing against the tiled floor, blending with the distant hum of jet engines beyond the glass.
We've taken the first step,
Alex said softly, a faint smile tugging at his lips, his eyes glowing with hope. Maya turned to him, her eyes brimming with gratitude and resolve.
There's still so much more to do,
she replied, her voice no longer trembling but steady and firm. Through the window, a gray airplane took off, leaving a white contrail against the brilliant blue sky, a symbol of new beginnings for the company and for them. As the echoes from the conference room faded into silence, Alex walked down the long, sterile hallway bathed in cold, white light. Though he had just experienced a pivotal victory, his mind remained burdened by unresolved thoughts. He knew exposing Richard and Ryan was only the beginning of a long journey. The ultimate goal wasn't just justice for Maya or Gray Air employees, but addressing the root of the problem: his father, the man who had given him the chance to see the company from a different perspective. Alex stopped in front of a large window, looking out over the bustling runways below. Gray airplanes ascended one after another, leaving faint trails in the sky, each departure a reminder of the responsibility he now carried. He drew in a deep breath, his gaze sharpening with renewed determination. To truly change Gray Air, Alex knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed unity, and more than that, he needed understanding from his father, William Gray, not just the CEO of the company, but the man Alex had always admired.
It's time,
Alex murmured, his voice low but resolute, as if to steel himself. Turning on his heel, he strode decisively toward William Gray's office. Whatever conversation awaited him there, Alex knew he had to confront it head-on to speak about the injustices he had witnessed, the misuse of power, and the vision he held for what Gray Air could become if its core values were restored. William Gray's office radiated authority, with its sleek modern design, from the dark wooden desk to the luxurious leather chair. Yet the soft light streaming through the large glass window, where he stood, lent the space an unusual sense of quiet. William silently observed the airport below, gray airplanes moving in and out under the warm glow of the runway lights, like the lifeblood coursing through the massive body of the corporation he had spent a lifetime building. The office door creaked open, and Alex stepped inside without knocking. His face was set in determination, his eyes reflecting a mix of resolve and the respect he still held for the man before him.
"Father,"
Alex began, his voice steady and serious.
"we need to talk."
William turned to face him, his eyes scrutinizing his son, as if trying to decipher the reason for this unexpected visit at such a delicate moment. He walked to his desk, lowered himself into his familiar chair, and folded his arms across his chest.
"All right,"
he replied, his voice calm as always, but his gaze sharp and probing.
"What do you want to say?"
Alex remained standing. He held his ground, fists clenched at his sides, his eyes unwavering as they met William's.
"You've always taught me that gray hair is a symbol of progress and innovation,"
Alex said, his tone firm but controlled.
"but what I've seen tells a different story."
William raised an eyebrow, a flicker of emotion breaking through his composed exterior before it disappeared again.
"Do you think a few minor incidents you've encountered during your internship could tarnish a corporation as significant as gray hair?"
he asked, his voice carrying a hint of reproach, though laced with undeniable authority. Alex stepped forward, his gaze unshaken.
"No, I don't,"
he replied immediately, his voice growing stronger.
"But those incidents aren't trivial, Father. They're symptoms of a system that's cracking, a system where power is abused, and the values gray hair once stood for have been distorted."
William leaned back in his chair, his fingers drumming lightly on the desk, his expression becoming harder to read.
"So what do you want, Alex?"
he asked, his voice low and cutting.
"Do you think you can walk in here, voice a few criticisms, and change an entire system?"
Alex didn't back down. Taking a deep breath, he spoke with clarity and conviction.
"I'm not here to criticize. I'm here to tell you that if you truly believe in the values you built this company on, then now is the time to face the truth. Now is the time to fix what's broken before it's too late."
William remained silent for a long moment, his gaze locked on Alex, as if trying to read every thought in his son's mind. But Alex didn't flinch. He stood tall, his eyes shining with a maturity William hadn't seen in him before.
"You speak as if you know everything,"
William said at last, his tone tinged with defensiveness. But as Alex continued, his voice softened, carrying a raw sincerity.
"I don't know everything, but I know one thing. Maya, a flight attendant who has worked tirelessly to protect her dream, was treated unjustly because she didn't have the power to speak up. And that's just one of many stories I've seen. I've witnessed the fear, the helplessness of dedicated employees, people who should be valued, not cast."
William's brow furrowed, but this time it wasn't in objection. His eyes, once guarded and defensive, began to soften, as if Alex's words were touching a part of him he'd long tried to bury.
"You've done something I never expected,"
William said slowly, his voice heavy with a mixture of weariness and genuine emotion.
"You've looked into the shadows I've ignored, the things I always dismissed as insignificant in the bigger picture."
Alex took another step forward, his tone now gentler but no less resolute.
"You can make this right,"
he said, his gaze filled with hope.
"Not just for me, but for the people who have given their all to gray hair. This is your chance to make gray hair the true symbol of progress you always dreamed it could be."
William looked at his son, his eyes reflecting a complex blend of regret and pride. He sighed deeply, rising from his chair and turning away to face the large window. The lights from the airport below reflected on his face, making his expression even harder to decipher.
"You've changed, Alex,"
he said, his voice low but brimming with emotion.
"I thought you would always see gray hair from the outside, but you've stepped inside and seen the things I didn't want to see. Maybe it's time for me to change too."
Alex nodded slightly, a faint smile forming on his lips. He knew this wasn't the ultimate victory, but it was a significant step forward, not just in the fight against injustice, but in the relationship between him and his father. The grand hall of Gray Air was elegantly arranged, bathed in bright lights. Hundreds of employees sat shoulder to shoulder, their expressions a mixture of tension and anticipation. Behind the stage, a large screen displayed bold, clear words.
Change begins today.
William Gray stepped onto the stage, microphone in hand. He paused for a moment, his gaze sweeping across the room. A few employees seated at the front avoided his eyes, hesitant and uncertain, while others, particularly those seated farther back, looked at him with cautious hope. This was not just another meeting, it was a pivotal moment marking a transformation for one of the largest aviation corporations in the industry. When William spoke, his voice was measured but clear.
Gray Air has soared for decades, flying higher, reaching farther, thanks to the dedication and hard work of everyone in this room. But we cannot continue to soar if our wings are weighed down by injustice, by the abuse of power, and by the betrayal of the values we once stood for.
The hall was silent. Some employees lowered their heads as if his words had touched wounds they had long endured in silence. William paused, his gaze softening, as though he were lost in thought before continuing. His voice dropped, carrying an uncharacteristic sincerity.
I must admit, there have been times over the years when I failed to see the problems that existed right beneath my feet, the shadows I should have addressed, but instead overlooked.
He took a deep breath, as if summoning courage to proceed.
But today, I stand here not only as a CEO, but as a man willing to listen, to admit my mistakes, and to act for a future that we all deserve.
His tone grew stronger, each word infused with resolve and passion, as though he sought to channel every ounce of conviction within him.
From today, Gray Air will change, not superficially or half-heartedly, but fundamentally.
The atmosphere in the hall shifted instantly. It was as though a spark had lit the room, and all eyes were fixed on William. Some employees whispered amongst themselves, a few nodding in agreement, as though they had been waiting a long time to hear these words. Others, those who had suffered quietly, looked at him with wary eyes, unable to fully trust what they were hearing. Yet, amidst all these reactions, a faint glimmer of hope began to emerge.
I have appointed an independent committee.
William continued, his voice echoing throughout the room.
A committee I trust to conduct a thorough and comprehensive review of every process, policy, and practice at Gray Air. Their role will not only be to uncover the truth, but to propose necessary reforms to ensure that every employee, regardless of position, role, background, or circumstance, is treated with fairness, respect, and the dignity they truly deserve.
His eyes scanned the room once more. He paused briefly, his expression earnest. His voice softened, though it retained its gravity.
But this cannot simply be my responsibility or that of leadership alone. Real change requires the participation and support of everyone in this room. Those who still believe that Gray Air can do better and those who are ready to act to make it happen. I need each of you, every one of you, to join in this effort.
The screen behind him shifted, displaying an image of Maya Johnson seated near the front of the stage. She sat with her head slightly bowed, her hands clasped tightly, but her eyes betrayed an unguarded emotion. That image seemed to serve as a silent reminder of the injustices she and many others had endured, yet it also symbolized resilience and hope. William's gaze rested on Maya as he continued. His voice turned warmer, yet remained resolute.
I have chosen Maya Johnson to represent the employees on this committee, a person who has not only worked tirelessly, but has had the courage to stand up for the truth. Maya has shown us that courage and integrity are not just admirable qualities. They are the foundations for any meaningful, lasting change.
A ripple of murmurs spread through the hall, but this time they carried admiration rather than skepticism. Some employees turned to Maya with looks of respect. as though she had become a beacon of inspiration for them. William allowed a small smile to touch his lips, though his eyes retained their determination.
"I know this is only the beginning,"
he said, his voice steady as he lowered it slightly.
"There will be challenges ahead, obstacles we will have to face together. But I believe that Grayer will not only overcome them, but soar higher because of the people in this room, people who have given their hearts to this company."
Applause broke out across the hall, hesitant at first, but quickly building into a unified wave of support that filled the space. Maya bowed her head slightly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, though she maintained her composure. From across the room, Alex caught her gaze and offered a small, encouraging smile. No words were exchanged, but their shared glance spoke volumes about what they had achieved together. William's eyes swept the room one final time as he concluded his speech with a heartfelt promise, one that resonated deeply.
"From today, we will rebuild the wings of Grayer stronger, fairer, and more deserving of pride than ever before."
Under the light of the large screen and the resounding applause, William stepped off the stage, his shoulders lighter than they had been in years. Within him burned a newfound determination to repair, to rebuild, and to prove that Grayer could become the symbol it was always meant to be. As the meeting ended, Alex and Maya walked out of the hall together. Their footsteps echoed across the polished floor, mingling with the distant hum of airplane engines reverberating through the glass windows. Alex turned to Maya, a quiet but proud smile on his face.
"We've taken a big step, but this is just the beginning."
Maya nodded, her eyes shining with determination.
"I'm ready for what's ahead,"
she said, her voice brimming with confidence.
"Grayer won't just be a dream. It will be a dream worth fighting for, worth believing in."
Beyond the hall's windows, a Grayer plane took off, its white contrail streaking across the azure sky, carrying with it the hopes and promises of a new journey, not just for the company, but for everyone working under its wings. After an emotionally charged company-wide meeting, the atmosphere at Grayer began to shift dramatically. What had once been hidden was now steadily exposed under the light of truth. And this time, no one, not even the most powerful, could evade accountability. A few days later, a special internal meeting was held in a small yet solemn conference room at Grayer's headquarters. There were no dazzling lights or the presence of the entire staff here, only those whose decisions would shape the company's future. At the head of the table sat William Gray, his eyes cold, carrying a gravity rarely seen before. Across from him sat Ryan Taylor, his face pale, his hands gripping the edge of his chair, as though clinging to the last vestiges of power. He knew that what was about to happen could not be undone, yet fear and panic remained etched in his eyes. William took a deep breath, his voice resonating with authority and a chilling edge.
"Ryan Taylor, with all the evidence presented, including video footage and testimonies from involved employees, there is no longer any doubt that you have deliberately abused your power, mistreated colleagues, manipulated processes, and even jeopardized passenger safety."
Ryan swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously around the room.
I was just following orders. I didn't mean to do anything wrong."
He stammered, his voice weak and unconvincing. William cut him off, his tone sharp.
"Following orders?"
He repeated, his voice dropping, each word weighing heavily in the air.
"Who are you trying to blame, Ryan? These decisions were yours, and you alone must bear the consequences."
He paused, his gaze sweeping over everyone in the room before continuing.
"Ryan Taylor, you are hereby terminated. This decision takes effect immediately."
William's words fell like a decisive blade, sharp and merciless. Ryan's mouth fell open, his eyes widening in disbelief.
"No, you can't do this to me. My father. Your father?"
William interrupted, his voice steely.
"Will answer for his actions, just as you must."
At the far end of the table, Richard Taylor maintained a veneer of calm, but his tightly clenched fists betrayed his inner turmoil. When William turned to him, Richard's eyes flashed with defensiveness, though he remained silent as William pressed on.
"Richard?"
William said, his voice low but carrying the weight of a verdict.
"You have abused your position to conceal misconduct, manipulate processes, and enable your son's unacceptable behavior. As a senior leader of Gray Air, you have gravely damaged the company's reputation and eroded the trust of our employee."
Richard gritted his teeth, struggling to maintain composure.
"I did what was necessary to protect the company,"
he replied, his tone edged with defiance.
"You know as well as I do that sometimes hard decisions must be made, but not decisions that violate ethics and the core principles of Gray Air."
William countered immediately, allowing no room for evasion.
"We do not need leaders who are willing to sacrifice the company's values for personal gain. Therefore, Richard Taylor, I am demanding your immediate resignation."
A heavy silence fell over the room. Richard closed his eyes, his face relaxing as if resigning himself to an outcome he had anticipated. After a few moments, he rose, adjusted his tie, and looked squarely at William.
"Very well,"
he said, his voice laced with anger and bitterness.
"But don't think this is the end."
With that, Richard left the room without another word. Ryan jumped to his feet, as though intending to follow his father, but William's piercing gaze stopped him in his tracks.
"Go, Ryan,"
William said, his voice firm, final.
"Take this as the lesson you desperately need."
When the door closed behind them, William sank back into his chair, exhaling deeply. The air in the room felt lighter now, but he knew there was still a long road ahead. Alex and Maya, who had been observing from the corner of the room, exchanged glances before Alex stepped forward. Placing a hand on his father's shoulder, he said softly,
"You did the right thing, Dad."
William looked up at Alex, his eyes weary but filled with quiet pride.
"Now it's time to rebuild,"
he replied, his gaze shifting toward the window, where a gray airplane ascended into the sky, carrying with it renewed hope for the future. The Gray Air offices were more alive than ever. Vibrant conversations filled the common meeting rooms, the coffee counters, and even the company's internal network. A post by Maya Johnson, the first she had ever shared, publicly detailed her journey and was quickly shared hundreds of times. Employees who had long remained silent began speaking up, sharing their own stories of injustices they had endured and the newfound hopes now beginning to take root. Screens in the main lounge at Gray Air headquarters displayed news headlines with glowing titles.
"Sparked by a brave flight attendant, Maya Johnson and Alex Gray, new icons of fairness in aviation."
Employees reposted these articles on their personal social media, adding heartfelt thoughts.
"I'm proud to be part of Gray Air,"
one employee wrote.
"Thanks to Maya and the reform team, I believe things will get better."
On a live television interview, Maya Johnson appeared in her crisp flight attendant uniform. Her smile was soft yet powerful, her eyes alight as she recounted her journey. The host looked at Maya with admiration.
"Your story has resonated far beyond Gray Air. It's inspiring the entire aviation industry. What gave you the courage to stand up like this?"
Maya took a deep breath, her hands clasped together on the table. But when she spoke, her voice was steady and sure.
"I didn't do this for myself,"
she began, her gaze meeting the camera, as if addressing viewers directly.
"I did this so people would know that fairness isn't some distant, unattainable ideal. It can become reality if we're brave enough to start, patient enough to fight, and united enough to protect."
Her words were clipped into sound bites and spread across social media platforms. Within hours, thousands of likes and positive comments flooded in, not just from Gray Air employees, but from aviation professionals and the public alike. One of Maya's former colleagues commented under the interview clip,
"Maya doesn't just represent Gray Air, she represents all of us who were once overlooked but still dared."
In his office, Alex watched the live broadcast of Maya's interview on his computer screen. A faint smile crossed his face. He opened Gray Air's internal network, where employees were passionately discussing the recent changes. A post from a junior staff member caught his attention.
"This is the Gray Air I've always dreamed of, a place where everyone is heard."
Meanwhile, William Gray sat in his CEO office, watching the same interview. He quietly sipped his coffee, his gaze distant but softer than it had been in years. As Maya's voice echoed through the room, he nodded slightly, his lips moving silently, as though repeating her words.
"Fairness can be achieved if we're brave enough to start."
The interview ended with applause from the audience. Maya stood, bowing slightly, her smile confident yet humble. As she left the studio, dozens of messages flooded her phone from former colleagues, friends, and even strangers thanking her for her courage and determination. Back at Gray Air, a wave of change was sweeping through the organization. Employees were no longer hesitant to voice their ideas for improvement. Discussions in meetings grew lively. Under William Gray's leadership, the executive team not only listened but took action. A new operational framework was soon announced, bearing the headline,
"Fairness, Transparency, Innovation."
In a quiet moment in the staff lounge, Maya and Alex sat together. Alex looked at her and smiled.
"You didn't just change Gray Air, Maya. You changed how people think about what's right."
Maya smiled back, her eyes gentle but resolute.
"I didn't do this alone. We did this, all of us."
Outside the lounge window, a Gray Air plane soared into the sky. Its long, white contrail streaked across the clear blue expanse, a symbol of hope, renewal, and a fairer journey just beginning. In the soft afternoon light at the international airport, Alex stood near the arrivals gate, holding a trainee flight attendant badge in his hand. The crowd bustled around him, but he paid no attention. His eyes were fixed on the automatic doors, watching each passenger emerge, waiting for a familiar figure. And then Maya appeared. She walked out with her usual calm demeanor, her trusty bag slung over her shoulder. Their eyes met amidst the noisy throng, and in that moment, all sound seemed to fade away. Alex offered a small smile, and Maya responded with a gentle one of her own, full of unspoken meaning. Without exchanging words, the two approached each other. Alex extended his hand, holding out the badge in his palm, a symbol of everything they had endured together. Maya's gaze fell on it, her eyes glistening with emotion.
"You know,"
Alex began, his voice steady and sincere,
"I did everything I could, but it was you who lit the fire for change. You showed everyone that courage and integrity can create something extraordinary."
Maya lightly touched the badge, her eyes meeting Alex's with profound gratitude.
"Thank you, Alex,"
she said, her voice soft but heavy with meaning.
"But I couldn't have done it alone. You were the wings that helped me soar higher and farther."
She paused, her smile growing brighter.
"We all have wings, Alex,"
she said, her eyes sparkling with conviction.
"We just need to know how to spread them. The sky is always vast."
Alex nodded slightly, his smile growing warmer.
"You're right. And now we've done something meaningful, not just for ourselves, but for so many others."
Maya held his gaze, their mutual respect and understanding evident without the need for further words. They both knew that this journey had not only transformed Gray Air, but had also changed them in ways they hadn't anticipated. Outside the large glass windows, a Gray Air plane ascended into the clear blue sky. Both Alex and Maya watched it climb, as if envisioning a brighter future they had helped shape.
"When will you return?"
Maya asked, breaking the silence.
"As soon as I'm ready,"
Alex replied, his eyes gleaming with determination.
"You've taught me that wings only matter when they're open to touch the sky, and there's still so much for me to learn from it."
Maya nodded, pride shining in her eyes.
"I'll be waiting. The sky at Gray Air is big enough for all of us."
They stood there for a while longer, savoring the peace in the meaningful moment. They knew their journey was far from over, but with each other's support, they were ready to face whatever lay ahead. The brilliant morning light flooded the Gray Air airport, illuminating rows of planes lined up along the tarmac. William Gray stepped out of his CEO office, his tailored suit impeccable, but his demeanor more composed than usual. For the first time in years, he was personally inspecting airport operations rather than relying on reports or assistance. His steps were slow and deliberate, his eyes attentive as he observed the employees at work, technicians, ground staff, and flight attendants preparing for their flights. Reaching a large glass window overlooking the runway, he paused. Alex and Maya stood there, their eyes fixed on a Gray airplane as it took off, its white contrail stretching across the deep blue sky. They didn't speak, but their expressions radiated peace and anticipation. William approached, resting a hand gently on Alex's shoulder. Alex turned, meeting his father's gaze. For the first time, William didn't just see Alex as his heir, but as a true partner, a man who had dared to step into the shadows he had avoided, to confront the flaws, and to fight for a better future.
"You did the right thing?"
William said, his voice low and filled with emotion. Alex smiled softly, not a smile of victory, but one of conviction.
"The sky isn't the limit. It's where we begin to create change,"
he said, his voice resonating through the space like a declaration for the future. Maya stood beside him, her eyes reflecting deep respect as she looked at the two men. She understood that their journey wasn't just about Gray Air, it was a story of people willing to embrace change and bring hope to those around them. Outside, a Gray Air plane continued its ascent, growing smaller against the vast expanse of the sky. It carried passengers and the promise of a new journey. The hum of the engines gradually faded, blending with a gentle yet inspiring melody, creating a perfect ending. The scene closed with an image of William, Alex, and Maya standing by the large glass window, their eyes fixed on the boundless sky. Final words appeared on the screen.
"Change is never easy, but it begins with a single step. With determination and unity, we will always have the wings to soar higher."
Alex Gray's journey wasn't just about personal growth, it was about fighting for fairness. You'll be amazed by what he achieved to transform Gray Air. Don't forget to follow the channel to catch more stories about conquering the skies and the hearts of those around him.